In this video, we're going to talk about everything that you'll need to start crocheting and start making amigurumi. Let's get started. Let's start with the most basic things that you're going to need. First, a pair of scissors. I usually recommend using fabric scissors. Now, the reason why I recommend the fabric scissors is that they cut really nicely and really smoothly. There's a saying that says, "I'll cut you, but not with these fabric scissors." And there's a reason why that's the saying. The second thing that we're gonna need is obviously a crochet hook. Now, I like to make amigurumi, so my favorite crochet hook is a size 4mm crochet hook, which is also known as a G hook. Now they have different sizes of crochet hooks, and I'm going to show you a couple sizes here. Now that's the G. We've also got the 3.75, which is the F. We've got the 5mm, which is the H. And then we've got the 5.5mm, which is the I hook. So as you know, it goes F, G, H, I. It's going in ascending order, 3.75, 4, 5, and 5.5mm. Obviously, we have a smaller one. An E hook would be a 3.5mm, and so on. But for the sake of amigurumi, for me anyways, I prefer using either a 3.75 or a 4mm hook. You will notice that if you use a smaller hook, you'll be crocheting a little bit tighter. If you're using a bigger hook, your stitches will be a little bit looser. So I like to jump in between a 4 and a 3.75. That's just for me. That's what the tension I like to use. But a 4 seems to be just perfect for me. The last thing that you're definitely going to need is yarn. So once you have these basic three things, I mean, you technically can get started. So let's go over the other little things that we're going to need though first before I talk about the yarn. This right here is a yarn needle. It's called a yarn needle because the tip is blunt, so you don't poke yourself, and you also don't kind of pierce through the middle of the yarn, so it kind of goes in between the two yarn strands. Now, this is a number 16 yarn needle, and the reason why it's got a little thicker end here and why I like it being a little bit open here is so that we can get a piece of yarn through that end. Now, the way that I do that is I'll pinch this yarn flat and push it through. And that's the way I thread my yarn. And this is used, you know, at the end of your project when you're tying off. We use a yarn needle just to kind of thread the yarn throughout the project and tie knots and finish off whatever we need to finish off. The next thing that you'll need are safety eyes. Now, these are called safety eyes because they've got this locking mechanism behind it. You can see this just kind of goes behind and then you push it on and they don't pull off very easily. So these sizes, I mean, I typically like to jump between a 6mm, 8mm, a 10, a 12, and a 14. I usually don't use anything beyond that, and typically for the size of amigurumi that I'm making, we're usually going to use a 10mm, probably around 10mm. Most of them will probably be 10mm eyes, and this is a 10mm eye right here. The next thing that you'll need is a stitch marker. Now this is a stitch marker to kind of keep track of where we are in our project. Now when we're crocheting in rows or in rounds, you can sometimes get lost where you're going, and this is to mark where exactly the start of one round begins and the end of one round as well. Another way to do that is just with a loose piece of yarn too as well. You can just kind of place a loose piece of yarn right when you finish a row, and you can keep tucking it and weaving it in between as you continue on with your rows. And that's the way I prefer to do it. But you can use even a paper clip too as well. But that's a stitch marker there. The next thing you'll need is some stuffing material. You can use any kind of polyester stuffing material there. They've got kind of a softer one, and then there's another type of stuffing material that can get a little bit harder too as well. Amigurumi typically is packed pretty densely, so even if you decide to go with this softer, more spongy stuffing material, you really have to pack it in there just to make sure that every little nook and cranny is filled. Moving on here. The next thing you'll need is a ruler, and that's just a basic ruler, just to measure and see how large things are. I like to use embroidery thread for accents. I think it'd be a good idea to pick up, at least black and white embroidery thread, just in case you want to make some eyebrows or some mouths. They can be really, really cute when they're a little bit smaller than the actual yarn that you're using. Pen and paper is also pretty important. Pretty rudimentary, but pretty important too. I use pen and paper to kind of track which row I am. Sometimes a pattern will say, do 10 rows of single crochet 7 or something. And in order to keep track of those 10 rows, I'll usually write down on a piece of paper what row I'm at. And lastly, the most important thing that you're going to need is yarn. So I've got 2 companies of yarn here that I like. One is Red Heart, and the other one is my personal favorite, which is Big Twist. I'm going to show you how to read the actual yarn label. Now, for my amigurumi, I am always using a medium weight yarn. That is also known as a worsted or an Aran weight yarn, and that's going to be a weight of 4. Now, when you buy yarn, it's important to know how to read the labels here. So I'm going to show you how to read the labels. Here, the first thing that it's going to show is, aside from obviously the company, is the yardage and also the weight. So you can see here, this is the length, this is the weight. And also keep an eye on that, because sometimes you'll notice that the yardage is bigger, but the weight is the same, which means that the yarn is actually thinner. So you definitely have to feel the yarns to see to make sure you're getting the right weight yarn and the right consistency of yarn. Now, Big Twist is nice. They'll tell you exactly what you probably need per project here. They're saying a scarf, you're going to need 6 of these bad boys. For a sweater, you'll need 3. I'm sorry, that's for a blanket. For a sweater, you'll need 3. A scarf, you'll need 1. A little hat, you'll need 1 too as well. Now, the next part here, we're going to talk about this first. Again, as I mentioned before, my favorite weight of yarn is medium, or also known as worsted yarn, which is also known as Aran yarn in the UK. But anyways, that is the weight of the yarn, is a medium 4 weight yarn. Now, this is a little bit confusing to read here, but we're going to be focusing on this crochet hook, not this the knitting hook, but it means the same thing. So this basically says that if you are using a US H hook, which is a 5mm hook, that's this one here, if you remember, 5mm H hook. If you're using one of these hooks, then 13 single crochets, 14 rows of that should equal a 4" by 4" square. So that'll kind of give you an idea of how the yarn should sit. Now, moving on, this stuff's pretty self-explanatory. Just some symbols, obviously. That's the do not bleach, do not tumble dry. You can iron it, but keep it on low, and then the temperature here. This here, that's going to be the color code, the color number, also the color name, and then the lot number. Now, this is really important to also pay attention to, the lot number of the yarn. Now, every yarn skein has a different lot number, and that means that when you are dyeing the yarn, every single yarn is done in a lot. So for example, let's say we have 100 or I don't know, 1,000 of these skeins, of this specific skein. It was dyed in this lot, 633033. There can be 100 other of these cornflower blue yarns that could be done in a different dye lot, say 633039 or 6330 whatever, or some number that's other than the one that's listed here. That means that that color could potentially be slightly different than the color that you're seeing right here. So if you're if you're really doing a project like a sweater or something that needs to have matching colors, make sure that you're getting them all within the same dye lot. And if it's not the same dye lot, then bring your yarn maybe to the store to compare and see if it's close or if there's any errors in it. And it's definitely a significant deal, because I remember a long time ago, I actually, we ran into a dye lot number that was for a white yarn skein, and it came out a little bit like pinkish or like palish, and that was a completely off-white color than the other whites. So pay attention to the lot number when you are buying multiple skeins of yarn, especially if you're making a large project. Just make sure they're all together. Oh, and also, there we go. You're also using an acrylic yarn here too. Sometimes they'll say like a wool mix or something, but let me show you the other company that is pretty popular here in the US, and that is Red Heart. We'll read this label too. You can see we've got the weight, which is 7 ounces, and the length, which is in yards over there, also in meters. We can also see coming down here, we've got the color name, the color number. We know that it's medium weight. Oh, this right here is just telling you how you need to find the ends here. They say 1, find the end that's underneath the tag. So let's see. Oh, there we go. Wait, no. Yeah, is that the, yeah. So find the end that's underneath the tab, and then also find the end which is not there, and then you want to pull the yarn from the inside. So you're not pulling from the outside of these skeins. It's not like rolling around and around in circles. You want to pull from the inside like this. That's the way to correctly take out the yarn. Anyways, moving on to here, again, you can see we have the, if you're using that 5.5 millimeter hook, then 12 single crochets, 15 rows of that should make 4 inches by 4 inch square there. And we're also seeing that we're 100% acrylic. And in this situation, there is no dye lots for this yarn. So you don't have to worry. You can buy this same exact color 10 years later, and it should be the same color. It should be the same color. So those are the important things that we need to get started. You can get these at any craft store, you can get them online, but that's the basis of what we need to get started crocheting and making amigurumi.